Hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done. Emberes nos Iisus benšuis. Ebe prosevke statite.
Egni pasi.
Domnem matis.
Maren شبه موت تطفن بريفك بصنيبه وهنايت بنوت بيوتم بن شويس وابن نوت يوبن سوتير إيسوس بخريستوس جابرسكي بازينيغون أبر بويسينيون أبره إيرون أبشبتني فافتياسو إيرون أفتيتو تنا بنتن شاري إطاي أنوصاي إنثوف Almighty وسنتب أره إيرون خن باي أو إسو باي نمني إهوتيرون تبن أون إنيريني نبنن شبيبان تكراتور Ebshoise penoti. O Master, Lord the God, the Pantocrator, the Father of our Lord the God and the Savior, Jesus Christ. We thank you for everything, concerning everything and in everything. For you have covered us, helped us, guarded us, accepted us to yourself, spared us, supported us, and have brought us to this hour.
Lord have mercy.
Therefore we ask and entreat your goodness, O lover of mankind, grant us to complete this holy day and all the days of our life in all peace with your fear, all envy, all temptation, all the work of Satan, the counsel of the wicked men, and the rising up of enemies hidden and manifest. Take them away from us and from all your people and from this church, holy place that is yours, but those things which are good and profitable do provide for given us the authority, read on serpents and scorpions, and upon all the power of the enemy. ولا تدخلنا في تجربة. Let us pray thankfully, our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Amen.
name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and God, amen. May the Lord bestow upon us His grace and His blessing now and ever into the ages of all ages, amen. If I knew that Sayyidina was going to be with us, I wouldn't have. But we'll take from Sayyidina's blessing, and we'll just give the introduction. The work that we have of servants can be likened to an image that is very common. I don't know if you can recognize the image on the left and the image on the right. The image on the left is the Jordan River. The image on the right is the Dead Sea. And the difference between the two is often what we see that can happen in the life of a servant or in the work that we have. One which is open and is flowing continuously, that gives and is a symbol in the Old Testament of life. And the other one, obviously, of death, even though there's some type of benefit to the soil or to the mud that they have, but of minimal benefit. So if someone stays too long in the Dead Sea, we already know it can affect their health, and that's why they're very cautious about it. What sometimes we find in the service, or what is likened to the type or the methods. So I'm not going to talk about what to teach, but this is more about how that we teach, and hopefully can be more effective on different levels in the service that we have. And if the old methods, which are not continually changing and growing and renewing as the Jordan River, then it can end up, even though the content, which is extremely important and essential for salvation, may be compromised and can lead to, instead of effective work, instead of change, instead of salvation, another. And many servants, after some time, may come with this complaint and say that we can't get the attention of the kids, we can't communicate our message, or sometimes even after what we find when we're planning or organizing a whole structure or system for the Sunday school, we may even find that this system itself needs to be to have some revision. I'll talk a little bit about the Sunday school curriculum, and that's, I think, the status too. We say we have a problem. How can we identify the problem? Because part of it is the content, but a lot of it is also the methods or the means or the delivery. And now, because of the change in society and the change with many of our youth that's happening as a result of technology, as a result of the culture and the changes in the world that we live in, not only is this a complaint among the servants, but now all of the means of education, whether it's elementary, junior high, high school, even college, they are saying that there is almost a revisiting of the approach, of teaching approach at all levels, because of this drastic change. There is one of the people, I don't know if you have seen this in the business world, they are now approaching, they say whenever we come to do anything, whether it's in the business world, whether it's in the church, whether it's in our life, we usually answer 3 questions, which is what we do, how we do it, and why do we do it. What many people, and what this person is directing to most of the youth and those who are going into the workforce now, is that we usually focus a lot on what to do and how do we do it more effectively. And sometimes we don't even ask why. What is the purpose behind what we are doing? And even in the curriculum, even in the lesson plan that we have, usually we start by asking, what is the lesson? And then how can I deliver it? And even sometimes we don't ask why. But in all of in every time that we have in the lesson plan itself, that it should begin with, why do we have this lesson? Or even, I can back up and say, why do we have Sunday school? And we know that it's for our salvation, but how do I see that this lesson is directed for salvation? And many things when we start asking this question first. Many times when I look at this lesson plan, it may or may not be relevant, may or not be essential, or may be so important that we may need to add or change or extend it. And the value of asking and evaluating this question first, it can cause a drastic revisiting to the service itself. And when we're not asking this question, and we find it, say, in certain stage, I think, in the service, for example, that there were a lot of new services that started in the diocese, maybe like 10, 15 years ago. And then the second generation, they're good in continuing. Say, for example, Sunday school. We didn't have Sunday school 100 years ago, right? This is the 100th year. So we are used to and accustomed to having Sunday school. But the second generation and third generation may not have the same vision or understanding of the importance, the value, the vision of what was established. The same thing I can say for the youth meeting, the same thing I can say you just initiated the Bible study, and the vision behind, for example, that program was very clear. So if we know why we are doing this, when we come to what and how, then it is much easier to answer those questions. But some things in the service, like if I'm teaching the same lesson 10 years, so I may or may not be asking why anymore. I'm asking, okay, what is the lesson? Okay, I have the lesson. Even how to do it more effectively, I may not ask. And so this is just a perspective which now in all of the teaching method, in all of the different teaching fields, that this has become more and more important. So why asks what is the purpose, how is the process, and what is the content? When we used to put the Sunday school curriculum, we were focusing on what? And even in the structure of it, it didn't matter. We said we have this content and we want to deliver the content, and so we just put what? The process wasn't always there. Sometimes we would put some examples, some methods, and why also, why this lesson is there, again, may or may not have always been communicated. What I wanted to focus just today is a little bit on the process, but the process is very closely related to why. As we were revisiting the curriculum, many of the people working were saying the same thing, that a good servant can make a good lesson, an effective lesson, out of any curriculum. A servant that is not as trained, focused, no matter how good the curriculum, it may not have the same result. And the different, yes, it can be, that doesn't mean they're not living a holy life. It doesn't mean that they have a good relationship with God and deep in prayer. A lot of it has to do with the process. Like many servants who will say the same thing. I don't understand. This lesson worked last year and 2 years and 3 years. But again, the question is how that we communicate the purpose in the proper methods for this group that we are dealing with. And it's not just a challenge for us, but like I said, for all. They did study, or they were interviewing the top professors at the top universities in America. I may have mentioned it in one of the talks. MIT, Caltech, Harvard, Yale. And they asked them, how do the graduates today, or the college students today, compare to those 10, 15 years ago? And they said that the students are smart, if not smarter than them, but their process of thinking and studying is completely different. So because of the technology, their attention span, for example, is much less. The amount of books, pages of the books that we can give them, before we could give 400, now we give 100. When they come to write a paper, in terms of their process of thinking and analysis, before they would read, and then come and write a paper that is laid out well, and it's one thought that is continually. Now they write a sentence, they answer a text. They write another sentence, they go online. Do the third sentence, they answer the phone. So the content is good, but the thinking process is much different. It's more scattered. It needs a focus. It needs, so even for us, how to help in this type of generation, the way of thinking, they used to say, I remember they said, you speak 45 minutes and then you have discussion. And 45 was pretty much the maximum. And even in the TV programs, for example, they would have, most of it was that length. Now they say it's 7 to 10 minutes. When I was in school, they were saying 20 minutes, and then you do shared pair, you do different discussion on the content which you delivered. We were used to having hours of lecture. Sometimes they give no break. But now they say it's not effective, it's not working. Because again, the process of thinking and processing the information is different. And it doesn't mean they are not any smarter. It just means the way that we deliver has to be completely different. Like I can't give this lecture to them, because after 7 minutes, we would have lost them in many other fields. So then they come back and they'll be in and out. Hopefully none of us are this, but they'll be in and out for 7 minutes focus, and then you lost. Then another 7 minutes they'll come and revisit you. So if you catch them, sometimes I ask them the question when they're out. So have no idea what you had said in the last few minutes. So there is is that how we focus on designing the lesson, how to engage the youth, and how to manage the class. That's just focus a little bit on there. The last one I won't have that much time to get to, and it's different for the ages. So just in general, how to design a lesson, and then a little bit on engagement, which is very critical, and then finally how to manage. In terms of preparation, we say that it takes years of experience, months of needs assessment, to see what exactly they need. From the conversations that I have, from what's going on in the news, from discussion with the parents, so then I'll be able to assess what are the needs for this group in this time, especially for junior high and high school, because there are, I remember when they had the that series that came on cable, which was about suicide, you know, the 7, yeah. So during that time, it was very critical that we have very clear, very direct, so whether it's in the youth meetings, whether in Sunday school, it was very important to address this need. Now, even I remember, so in one of the youth meetings, and I gave a talk after, I have a line of the children who, whether it's for them or their friends who are facing the suicide. And thank God it alerted me to know which ones to follow up with, because it's not just something that comes and goes. This thought is always in the teenage years, but if it's not addressed with quickly and directly when they come in the the challenging period of time, problem at school, problem at home, problem in life, then this thought comes to them. Also, in terms of preparing the reading, writing, thinking, and praying, they used to say, I remember one of the monks, he says, you give a sermon for 20 minutes, you pray for 6 hours. So I told him, what if we have to speak for 6 hours? What are we going to do? Because sometimes in the week we have that much. For in the Sunday school is more controlled. So you have a certain period of time. And so there is the preparation for that. And then how to evaluate the process of the way you will deliver. When I was in the school, they have teaching awards. And the one who got, especially for the new teachers, the graduate student who got the biggest teaching award, every year he would get it. So I asked him, I said, how are you, what is your secret? Why is he was better than some of the very experienced professors. He said, after I prepare everything, I sit for 2 hours before the lecture, and I think through, so without the notes, without everything, and of course in a prayerful state, what I'm going to say and how to say it. And so I said, okay, give me an example. He said, I had a talk last week on the incarnation. So I said, okay. And he's speaking to college students. They have a class that they require all the college students to take, whether or not they want to do theology. So he has to speak about the incarnation for all of the college students, most of them Catholic, but some of them nothing. So he said, I started speaking by asking them, he said, how many of you have gone through a breakup? And he goes through the stages of the way most of them in relationships, and then how the difficulty in where they don't eat and they don't talk and they can't sleep, and they're in a state completely different. They lose control. So of course most of the people, by the time he goes, he said, how is this theology? Even I said, why are you going to go and speak about this if the topic is on the incarnation? He said, to take from this and to move into the stage of life where we lost everything. So the analogy is already there. Once, and they call it the hook, and I'll get to the different stages. Then to reach and see how to connect and how to make what content I will offer relevant to them. Usually we used to do it in the middle or at the end. He said, no, we have to start in the beginning. And so, for example, when I would start from here, I should have asked, for the sake of time, I would have asked how many times you gave a lesson and what you felt that it didn't get communicated. How many times after you spent for hours preparing and hours reading, but at the same time you couldn't even get maybe to the content itself. Or we find that after the hour and a half, you're only 20 minutes into the lesson and 1/3 of the way through. Or how many times after the end of the year you felt that we have students, they go through the whole 12 years of Sunday school and we think they're excellent, and then by the end they're outside of the church or away from the church, or very shocking, even worse things. We say, how did this happen? How come the service which we expect didn't fulfill the result? Yes, there's many things that happen, maybe 1, 2, but if there's a larger percent, and we find it sometimes in the service, we find a large percent, sometimes a whole class, like the whole group, is not as what we planned, what we were expecting. And so this process of evaluation, some of it, not all of it, is for teaching methods, but some of it can be more directed. And how that, what we're concerned is that all of the prayer, all the work, all the labor that goes into the lesson, should we want a change, not just long term, but every time, right? Each time, or why are we here if the message is not being communicated and translated into change of life? Because sometimes we say, okay, I got through the lesson, they understood it, they memorized everything very good, but if the change of life is not there, then we say, okay, then it's something else. It's not what we had anticipated. So that's why we have a question, why am I giving the lesson? And there are two main types of lessons. There's informational and transformation. Information is teaching, and transformational is more preaching. And we need both, as Christ said, to teach and to preach. He went about teaching and preaching. The distinction is that most of the curricula focus on teaching. So you teach more by teaching more. The more content I give you, then the more, the better. Transformational is opposite. Actually, to teach more is to say less. And that's why you spend more energy and effort not in what I am saying, but how am I saying. And there's a lot of tools, I'll speak about some of them, is in terms of changing life. And I believe, I mean, it could be wrong, but many of us as servants and many in the curriculum itself needs to be changed from more informational to transformational learning. If I were to ask you, for example, this talk intended to be more informational or transformational? Or before, what? Both. Okay, very good. Both. Can you do both? I was going to ask you that first. So is it possible to do both? Yes. Do we usually, but the problem is, many times we think we are doing both, but you end up to be much more informational than transformational. Why? Because to get through the content, there's not always enough time for transformation. Like if, so it is both, but it's much more informational, and I give you the tools for the transformation. Because what it should be, if I were doing a completely transformational talk, then I would give you the handout of different types of a lesson. And then I would say, go and prepare this with some of the servants and come back and report back. And then exchange, and then we would do an evaluation, and then we would do so most of the time, our time here would be on how that we are transforming our thinking, our preparation, and our delivery. But because we're only here for a short time, I will just give you the information and seeds for transformation. Yes?
Is it not impossible to have a transformational lesson without having an informational lesson?
Yes. So the transformational is maybe most of the time you are speaking very little. That's why I remember when they were teaching us in the beginning, I said, what? No, now we're not going to teach. There's nothing to teach. Now the youth, if you give them, I remember it was many years ago, it was when the internet was starting. So I was teaching Sunday school, and one of the kids during the week asked a question about the Gospel of Judas. And one of the servants couldn't answer, so then I gave him a little bit of information. So during the week, he emailed me, it was new, about it. So I sent him some response, and then he sent back for the gospel. And he was very interested in this concept. But what I began to realize, that the youth, when they have the interest, that you give them this, they can learn much more. We just have to direct them and say, no, don't read here, read here. One time I was serving in one of the churches. It was a very small church. At the end of the service, I had given a talk to the parents during the Sunday school, because it's a small church. So then afterwards, one of the children came and said, I'm not going to Sunday school anymore. It's the last time. So I was trying to ask her, why? What's the reason? She said, that's it, I'm not going. I told my parents, and we're not going anymore. So I said, it can't work. After a few minutes, the servant came and said, that's it, I'm not teaching Sunday school anymore. He said, what happened? He said the same thing. By the time I find out what happened, so the girl was asking a simple question, or it was actually a hard question, and the servant couldn't answer. So he made up some answer, and she kept asking follow-up. And it didn't make sense. His answer didn't. So she kept asking, and he got embarrassed. He ended the lesson, and she said, oh, well, they don't know. The church doesn't know. So she gave up, and he gave up. So then I went back. I was doing my dissertation at the time, so I told her, no, send me whatever question you have, and I'll answer. She was 9 years old. So then I came back to Indiana. I found 10 questions. And each one different subject. So I answered basic answers. Within a couple hours, I find follow-up. I accept this question. I don't know about this. So then I sent her some links to books, one by Pope Shenouda, one by somewhere else. She read them. So I read the book of Pope Shenouda, but I have a question on this page and on this and on this. She's 10 years old. So this took, for me, I would have to schedule extra time to answer this. So I told her parents she's not an elementary school. She was a theologian, very advanced. Now she's in college, but very advanced. But she's very bright. She needs a lot more than the others. So we're just giving them tools, and of course discuss with them. By the end, we tell them, no, stay away from these books, stay in this section. So the transformational learning can be very helpful, but the difficult with this generation is the engagement, is the interest, is to spend the time. They have plenty of time. They use half of it for the school, and the other half goes in different things. So how that we do that inspiration and engagement. And that's what we need, like I said, whether it's in the Sunday school, whether it's in the Coptic schools, in the Bible study program, or in the theological schools. It's the same question. The same thing that this generation of teachers and servants are struggling, all of us are struggling with it. Even I was talking with Ambangelos a couple of years ago, and he used to do videos, for a video message. And they used to be like 5 to 7 minutes. And after a while, I was telling him it's very good. He said, no, now we decided to change it to 2 to 3 minutes, because when we do the analytics, we find after 2-3 minutes, they stop listening. So some of the initial message has to be 2 to 3 minutes. And they said the same for the hook. So when you are starting your Sunday school lesson, there's no time anymore to introduce. You have 2 to 3 minutes to give the whole message. And the rest is reflection, explanation, resources, transformation based on that. And so that's why the engagement is one of the most critical. That's why the commercials now, like, they condense them even shorter than they used to be 10 years ago, because they won't listen to the rest of even the commercial. So how do we have more is less? And that how can the change impact not just one subject? So before we talk about dating, we talk about reading, we talk about the importance of prayer. But now, when we talk about transformational learning, you are giving tools and perspectives that can reach many different subjects. So that's why, yes, I'm teaching less, but you're giving them tools that will help them in the rest of their life in many fields, not just one. For example, when we talk about faith, there's many, whether it's faith in the sacraments, faith in the church, faith in God, faith during the time of tribulations. So it's a general concept. But how that we strengthen their faith or give them tools, whether it's through prayer or through others, that will help them in different aspects of their life. It's a very different way of delivery, even in planning. Like when I come now to plan, when you sit down, it's a very different perspective than it used to be. Because like I would tell you, we would have the content, we outline, we said, okay, I'm going to cover this, point 1, point 2, point 3, example, I finish. Now, I remember once I was giving a sermon in church, and one of the priests says, no, 1 point. Before we used to give 3. But you can give the 1 point in 3 different ways. And for this coming generation, that is almost like maximum that we can provide. So if we go back and we evaluate, like I said, the same thing. The Dead Sea has a lot of water. But it can be too much of it is destructive, right? That's why they even said the healthier part is at the surface level. When you go very deep, especially, it can cause many problems. Then we asked that question. Okay, so how do we engage youth? They say there is an evolution now even in our minds. This study was done by a professor at UCLA to study how our brain processes information over time. The first cultures were hearing cultures when Moses was preaching, and the disciples in the beginning were preaching, and not everyone read. And so you process differently when you're just hearing. When you're listening to music, for example, it activates certain type place in your brain. When you're reading, there's a different part of the brain that is being processed. And in the digital age, it's completely different, because there's more senses that are being involved. So they took someone reading a book, and this was the brain study, and then they took someone who was on Google, and they said this is the more activity. So although more of your brain is active, less of the analytical part is being dealt with. And so that's why they started to say, what is the long-term effect of children who are growing up in the digital age? We don't know all of, but we do know that it affects attention span, short-term memory, analytical thinking, and how they process. So now they're more scanners and surfers. So I give them an article, they can scan it very well, but they won't digest maybe the essence of it, or be able to do the analytical thinking that will help process them through it. And we see this in papers, we see this in many levels, even in the business field. So they can do work, right? But the creative thinking sometimes now is challenged, even though they're very creative, or they love creative things, but that has to be activated. I was reading recently, someone was saying that boredom is important to activate the creative part of your brain. But because now entertainment, they're continually being interested, then they don't reach boredom, so they don't really reach the creative, and that's where a lot of the decisions, the planning, the discoveries take place is right after the boredom period. So I'm not going to tell them you have to be bored in order to be creative, but I know that that is a process of even where your deepest thinking, maybe sometimes where there's time where your mind is not thinking of other things, so that you can reach that area of, like I said, creative or thinking. Our youth have the expectation in engagement for us to be direct, clear, and organized. There's something like the Greek thinking or preaching where it is like the waves. It goes up and down, and you can't really catch the wave. But for the youth, they don't have the time. So if they feel even like you're telling a story, sometimes we lost them. They also want us to be honest and open, because before there's some things that we can't speak about this, we can't speak about, but they need like direct answers. Yes, some things are more complicated, so I'll tell them at first, this is a complicated question. We need to sit and talk about it. But the basic points, 1, 2, 3, 4. And sometimes we don't do that. I was last week in one of the churches, and I was supposed to speak to the high school youth. So before that, Abuna asked me, he said, no, but we have elementary, can you give them? I said, I didn't prepare for elementary, but I took what I was going to give to the high school. It was about Kiyak introduction, about the 4 houses and the rest, so I gave it to them. I found maybe 20, 30 questions from the, and I told them, Abuna, they're very advanced from what I could. And they said, well, how do you know all these things? I said, well, we just read, and we hear, and we learn. Went to the high school to give the advanced. I found 0 questions, 0 engagement. So I said, maybe, so is it? So either the talk is not fitted to them, but I found also there's a lot of basic things that were not there. So they needed more of that relevance to their life first. So it was maybe a little bit too high for them, well, whereas I was thinking, no, this is a basic talk, and that's why it was more suitable for elementary than it was for them. Although I was thinking after, how are they going to praise God? They don't know the basic story of Moses crossing the sea, so the first host is not going to click in anything for them. But at least it gives awareness for us. We say, no, this talk was not relevant for them. It didn't produce the proper result that I have. So maybe what even sometimes our lessons now, we shift it to younger age, and we have to have completely different approach for that group. So we can talk about that after. How that we avoid what's called, someone called it ramblimation. Ramblimation is a lot of information without organization. And we have this a lot, like I said, it's more in the Greek mind. Or distraction, which is an explanation. I can be explaining many things without direction. For example, I can take 1 Corinthians 13, or I can take Matthew 5. And I take a verse and I explain. Verse and explain. But without direction, then it's it's random thoughts. It's useful, it's beneficial. But for this generation, they need one and explain and apply. And I remember when we were in Sunday school, that's what we would take one beatitude, for example, and we take the week to apply. And the first maybe 20 minutes of our Sunday school was how each one has to say how they tried to apply this beatitude. Yes. Right, and because everyone, you couldn't get away, like it wasn't, they didn't skip and pick one person. Everyone had to, so I remember it was, you are thinking, if you didn't do the work during the week, you have to think of something to say. It was a very effective way of applying the beatitude, and because we did it 8 weeks in a row, so by the end, I mean, at least you're going to try to apply something. But the principle stuck. Like even I remember of all the lesson, there's many things that I can remember, but I remember that servant was very effective in communicating the lesson. I know many of you probably have already done it, but it's just an illustration of how I could I could explain all the Beatitudes in one lesson, and I can tell them to go and apply it. But without that clear direction, and unfortunately this generation needs very clear instruction. Do 1, 2, 3, right? Or even we assume they know how to pray. Some of them, yes, forgot and say, what do you mean pray? Like, okay, I prayed this, I prayed, even just the open prayer. There's a lot of training or a lot of things that we have assumed. For example, I was talking to one of the groups about Bible study, and we were talking about meditation. How do you meditate on the scriptures? And in their mind, when you use meditation, they think of the Buddhist so they say, what do you mean? So even those, or how to do personal retreat. How do you take from the scripture and apply it to your life? Very simple concept. But some of those basic concepts in the older is somewhat, it needs to be reviewed. And like I said, if we just did that, you are giving them tools for daily living. Yes, they should have had it in first grade and second grade. But for some reason, there is a gap in applying those principles. So in how to increase student engagement, there's something called anticipatory sets that you use in the beginning. So it could be a series of questions, like I told you in the beginning, how times it wasn't effective. You can tell a story, but the story has to be short and it has to be very engaging for them. You can start by a saying of the fathers or a biblical saying, but usually that's the second part. So usually I start with questions, I can start with a story, and then the part that comes immediately after is if I summarize the whole lesson in one sentence, one story, one verse, what is the take-home message? Immediately after. And then I take the rest of the time to elaborate or tease that out, like how to illustrate it. I could even start with an activity. Usually to put the activities in the middle or at the end. But sometimes that could be the way to engage them and get them active. Sometimes in the younger ages, they get completely distracted if they move or talk too much, so that's why we delay it. The engagement is not as much of an issue, it's just maintaining their focus. You could also start with a discussion and sometimes a video, but again, it should be short and the message should be very clear from the video. And that is sometimes, I remember for high school, we'd use a video. There was one of the college groups. We come time for discussion, nobody wants to discuss. So we got a video for them of college students discussing a certain subject, and then I would ask them what they thought about the people who were discussing. And sometimes that's necessary, or sometimes that's helpful. So we should answer from the first question, why is it important for me to listen to you? I used to, what is it here? So they say do not start with apologies, because if I say, I'm sorry, I didn't have time to prepare, they stop listening. They have an excuse now not to listen to you, right? Or of different questions that are not really related to each other. I can start this question, but if they're not related to exactly what you're talking about, don't do that. Or to talk in general, how was your weekend? What did you do today? This is not the way they're not here for that discussion. Or a very advanced theological concept in the beginning. Again, it's not there because I have to answer why before I speak about what. So I may not even tell them. Of course, with PowerPoint, it's hard to hide it. I might not tell them, today we're going to talk about this. They don't need to know in the beginning. They need to know at first, if it's the story, if the example, if it's the questions, how it's going to affect, why should I listen, and how is it going to affect my life? That's the first point. Again, for the other generation, the what was first. What are we going to talk about today? They want to know. This group is coming in to say, why am I here, and why are you taking my time, and why is this important for me? Because if I didn't answer in the 2 minutes, this turned off, and we're just waiting until you finish so I can go and do something important, unfortunately. So all of these things, like I said, different perspective. Then there's different verses, or the proverb that is linked to it. And this is the take home. They will remember, I assume they will remember the first part, right? Like I gave you the example of that teacher who was speaking about breakup. They're going to remember the breakup, but when he says that God came to restore the brokenness in our life and give us true love and true meaning and true future, or whatever sentence, whatever verse, for God so loved the world, whatever he used afterwards, that's what I want them to take home. And all of the points or whatever comes after is focused around this point. I could even repeat it 2, 3, 4, 5 times. I used to think, or they used to tell us, 3 times. You tell them what you're going to say, you say it, and you repeat what you said. Now, one of the professors was telling me, do you know how many times you have to repeat? 7 times. I don't even know yet, but they say in order for them. So I used to think of one of the most effective teachers that I had. So he could repeat 4 or 5 times in that lecture, which is the most important take-home message. But then next week and the week after, somehow he will repeat it. So it may not be 7 in the hour, but within the few weeks or so, he has repeated that and reviewed it for you. So if someone could still have a question in week 3 about this, what happened, a few weeks ago. So there's many examples. For example, a good word can change a bad person. A bad word can change a good person. Sayings of the fathers that are very relevant, that they will learn. So it can't even be focused either on a verse or one of the sayings of the fathers that illustrates the lesson. These are just some examples. This was one of the process. So sometimes just to develop that saying could go through a different process. So when I was preparing this in the beginning, I thought of old truths need new methods, or old methods lead to dull ears. And then I found the example of you can't teach an old dog new tricks, but then I said if I say that for the servants, they're going to say that you're calling us. And then I found out that actually you can teach an old dog new tricks, and they found many ways to do it. So even that illustration was not going to be effective. So then what I told you about the don't let your Jordan River become a Dead Sea. So that the life-giving lesson that you have, if the circulation ends, if the movement and that renewal, the process of renewal is no longer there, then yeah, you will be like the broken record. You're saying the same thing you said last year, the year before that, and the effectivity is not there. So it will start to sink or float, however you want to speak about it. So again, the saying helps you to focus, helps them to understand what you are speaking about, the difficult concepts, and helps them to remember what you said in the whole hour. And they can go back to it, and even, like I said, I will refer to it later on, it helps me to identify what I want to say. I want this lesson to focus on how we have to have renewal in our lessons, in our plan, in our service, how that we're focusing on why, how that we have this re-examination of my life, my service. And so that's why when I do the rest of the selection, it makes sense. Without this, I'm putting a lot of nice things together which may not go together. Just like Asian fusion or different type of food. Now they put different types of foods together and they say, oh yeah, it tastes good. But sometimes it doesn't. But sometimes we say, no, it should work. I like this, and put them together. But it doesn't always produce the proper result. Then they say how to connect the message with the visual anchor. I gave you those two pictures, but sometimes you'll use different illustrations or in class that will help them remember what you were speaking about. There's many ways to do it, but how that you can tie the two together. One of the teachers, Sunday school servants, he was speaking about repentance, and so he brought a big trash can into the classroom, and every few minutes he'll bring the trash can closer, and it was full of trash, and it wasn't a small trash can, and it was when the students, the children were saying, well, why is this here and why are you using it, till they start to speak about how the sin affects us and how it needs to be emptied or else your life will be like this. So the image, very hard image, they could remember it for years later. And he brought from home the largest trash can that he could have. But we prepare it, not just to be theatrical, but again, to connect the message, which we deliver, to a physical or a visual. They say that the learning pyramid, here there's different types of techniques. There's passive learning, which is lecturing, reading, audiovisual. Even this is passive learning. So before we say, PowerPoint, they're going to listen. So this is the effectivity. The participatory teaching methods, which most of the learning now takes place in, whether it's demonstration, discussion, practice by doing, or teaching others, like we get them to. So they say this is now where most of for transformational learning has to be in the bottom part of the pyramid. And that's the transition I believe we are all in, how to move from lecture style with a discussion to a practical application. They also say in terms of how people understand. There's visual learners, there's audio learners, there's kinesthetic learners who learn by doing. But even this diagram, they say is not as effective anymore because people are mixed. They learn through more than one ways of learning. Yes, some people focus more on visual. They say that visual learners speak more quickly, and they say a lot of things. Other ones who are more audio learners, or they learn by reading, speak much more slow. And how that the practical, like they need much shorter and fewer lessons because how to apply it. Just like the one father in the desert when he had 3 disciples and he gave them all the scripture and they said, come to me in 1 year, right? One of them said, I read the whole Bible. The other one said, I memorized the whole Bible. The third one said, I was trying to apply one verse and I still couldn't after the whole year. So they're the same content, but different ways of applying it. And so that's why they say when we teach, we have to have multiple means of teaching methods. So one will not only work. It can't be lecture only, it can't be listening only, it can't be visual only. How to engage all the different types of learning, this is the challenge. And that's why when we prepare a lesson, you're going to find more of the preparation is going to be in the methods. Of course, prayer is number one, but more in the methods than it's actually going to be in the content. Whereas before we used to spend more time in the content and we'll add 1, 2, or 3 things to keep them engaged. Now it's a little bit reversed. So you have, like I said, these different types of learning styles for the same youth. They have in some of the churches now in addition to the Sunday school servants, and you have a library, but they would have a special library for the activities, for the props, and there are some servants that this really is their talent. Like, I can give the content, but there are some servants that they're very gifted in how to move that into the audiovisual or kinesthetic learning. If I take the example of teaching hymns, there are some that they will learn from able to connect and apply. There's a third that they will only learn by practicing when it's in the church. Even in sometimes the practice is not as much when I'm praying. So there's different types that they're learning the same hymn, but how, again, that I know this. So even if I know one is more geared towards visual, so I need to help this one, I need to help this one in that way, so that the end result is the same. It's no less, it's no different. But again, and there are some that they will learn more when the explanation behind the hymn. Like I remember when we were in the hymns, so much was given for why we say this hymn, when is it said, and we know the secret or the trick that when we teach the hymns, you can teach Bible, you can teach fasting, you teach the cycle of the year. Everything in the church can be compacted in the hymn. That's why I focus on teaching hymns in the beginning, because it's one of the best ways to keep the youth in the church. And when it's done young and they have that motivation, it's almost like you have a cushion for many years of difficulty that will maintain that. Okay, there's so much to speak about, but that this applies to divine liturgy, and this applies to many other things. I gave the example of the Bible study because when you started, you had the clear goals, right? We want them to read, we want them to understand, we want them to apply. How do we get them to read every day? And you develop the system based on that. How do you get them to understand? So we included a part to explain it. How do we get them to apply it to their life? The same thing. So if I have the goals very clear, then when I come to apply in the service, then it'll be linked, clearly linked, and so you find a very successful, very effective service. And there's many other things, but we can, like for example, how do I confess effectively? Like we can have lesson on confession, but usually when I look in the curriculum, most of the lesson is why do I have to confess, which is good. So the why is answered, but then it doesn't always say how. How to, sometimes we say how to prepare yourself. And then what is said and what is not part of confession, like what is just stories. So even that in the Sunday school, I don't think it needs to be reevaluated. Or they would take the class and they would take them all to confess after to apply, right? The same thing. So most of the lesson wasn't applying what they were talking about. Okay, I think I'll go to this last thing to see how to manage the class. Just this last study that was very important. They did a study and they took a group of kids, they divided them in two groups. They gave them all a very easy IQ test. It was, I think, 10 questions. And they told one group, they told one group, you must be smart at this. They told the other group, you must have worked very hard. Okay, just one simple comment. This group, you are very smart. This group, you're very hard workers. Afterwards, they asked them, do you want to take a harder test or you want to take the same level or easier? The people that they told them, you are smart, 67% said we want the easy option. The 92% that they encouraged them by working hard said we want to take the harder option. Why? Yeah, the first group said, they think that I'm smart. I don't know if I'm smart. If I take the harder one, they're going to find out I'm not as smart as I should be. So I want the easy one so they can still think that I am smart. The kids that we encouraged them because they worked hard, they said, okay, I'm going to work harder now at this one, and it doesn't matter how hard. Now, because it's a harder exam or harder test, I need to work harder. And the difference was in also when we serve. How do we encourage them? And most of the time we said, oh, you did good at this. But sometimes when they don't do well, they get very depressed, disturbed, anxiety because they didn't perform well. But if we were focusing, and this is mainly for younger ages too, on how they work and try to do the best, right? On effort. They used to give us a grade, and then the grade for effort. And then the third one was like talking in class. Do you have the same thing, the report cards? Yeah, so they have citizenship, yeah, and participation the same. So then after this, they gave all the kids a very difficult test. So that they gave them the same one, then they gave them the hard one, and then they gave them the impossible test. They found that the ones who they told them, the effort group, that you worked hard, they worked harder, they worked longer, and they enjoyed it. The first group, many of them gave up, they got very discouraged, and they performed worse. So they're not a smarter group. But some of them performed worse because of that stress, unnecessary, even though I was encouraging them. So they said the same thing, this is in the class too. How do I encourage this generation in a positive way? They found that the end result was 50% different. So the effort group, they performed 30% better than the first test. The intelligent group performed 20% less. And it's just a basic principle. So in these principles too, how do I engage them? And how do I encourage them to continue before? Like sometimes you say, but the hymn was easy, or the lesson was easy, or the verse is easy. How come you don't know it? Right? So I'm discouraging them from, but on the opposite, when I encourage them to work, to labor, and it's rewarded, then that increases, like I said, more afterwards. Okay. I think this is good summary, just for the sake of time. So we see in terms of designing the lesson, we focus on why, what are the clear goals, and how I organize it. The second one, how to engage the youth, and whether the introduction, and then the verse, or the proverb, or the saying of the fathers, and then how they have the creative or innovative picture, so that I give a visual link to what I said. And then, of course, in management of the class, and there's many different ways, but it depends on the age. Maybe another time we can go through that, and glory be to God. No questions? Yes.
I guess one of my main questions is that with the why being the main emphasis right off the bat, at least with the high school youth that I've become accustomed to serving, the what isn't always there in order to discuss the why correctly. So, for example, not having a strong spiritual foundation on correct things, so when they get rushed to want to discuss social issues like liberalism and abortion, things of that sort, the what isn't strongly founded in order to discuss that at a level where we can meet eye to eye.
And sometimes they just want to discuss social issues, but we're not here like primarily. Yes, it's relevant. Yes, it's everyone's talking about it, but also we say, okay, there's more important things when we finish this. So, because even when I ask, what's the difference between the Sunday school and the youth meeting? Because we used to have the discussion for many years. So then we would say, okay, there's some basics that I'm expecting to provide in Sunday school, and then more of the social issues, the life application, will go in the youth meeting. Sometimes it gets blended, so then I end up to have just 2 meetings. But we're trying to identify Like say if you have a Bible study, it's clear for Bible. You have another one maybe focusing on dogma and liturgical, and then you have a third that's focus on spiritual, which is more the youth meeting and life application. Because really Sunday school, like yes, you benefit spiritual, but it was more for, like I said, teaching, and maybe the youth meeting was more for preaching. It could be vice versa, but this is, I remember when we were serving, that was the objective. Every once in a while you have a Bible study, but there was a time for Bible study, and we have a plan here with this objective. You have a plan in the youth meeting for something, and then you have the Sunday school for something else, and they're all coming together. But that I think that coordination needs some reworking.
Well, I mean, I guess just from a practical perspective, right? Those would be 3 separate meetings in which the youth and their parents involved would have to be committed. And most of our youth are not the types that would be committed to 3 separate meetings. Most of them would only show up to Sunday school, maybe the Friday night meeting if that's applicable. So in order for us to be able to bridge that what and why, what is needed from us as a servant to help bridge that what and why in an hour, as quickly as we possibly can, as effectively, not to answer their question completely because it can't be done in an hour, but to at least help identify the issue, discuss the issue.
I think so there's a couple of things. I think also in terms of the issue that we're not going to reach anywhere, because it's just going to be whatever's in the news last week, and that's not, like, we're not going to finish anything. We're not going to reach the basics, and that's unfortunately what's happening even in the schools. Like, you're going from one subject to the next, but the foundation is not there, so there's nothing built on it. That's why any small problem can be.
How do you fight the addiction to social media? The problem is not just spiritual in church, in Sunday school, but even at the schools. The attention span is shorter.
Yeah.
I was watching a documentary about it yesterday, and some professors say we're losing scholars, we're not getting as many scholars because people are not reading, are more addicted to games or social media or whatever, and they're not learning.
I think it's not an easy question, but part of it begins very young. So even now, most of the psychologists are saying that between before 4 years, there should be 0. Like now, 1 or 2, and they're acting up, so we give them an iPad or something to keep them. They said 0, and then afterwards it's like half an hour. I don't know if it was every day or max. So it's even organized from a very young age with this plan. Then when you get into the older ages, we have in Sunday school, we have in school, and we have some hours at home that they're not functioning. I know some of the parents, they don't let them sleep, have the phone or iPad or whatever in the same room when they're sleeping. Like they charge them, one of the mothers, she charges everything for them, so they have plenty of time where there's no, because sometimes they text very it won't stop. So we give them means to help them in that. And also what we were trying to do a couple of years ago, but I never got there, which was to have how to encourage them to go off social media. Some of the older youth are doing this now, and it's becoming more popular, how to spend downtime. And foster that spirit. It needs some work, but I think we have some youth that are already doing that. So like in the retreats, we take away, and they like us to do it, actually. Oh, we didn't know that. They fight in the beginning. But if we're successful, the next retreat that we like, aren't you going to take away the phones? And I remember one time we said, oh, we didn't arrange for it because there were so many, the parents gave us. But after a while, they benefited from it. And they were looking forward to it. So how that we encourage them in that and help them, because it's a big struggle. I know one of the kids, because in the confession, so he's saying, so much problem with the phone. So he got a flip phone, the old one, for a while, until for school he needed to switch back. But even for him, like encouraging how that they use different means to help them in the struggle, because they say now we look at the phone over 130 times, I think it was, the average person a day for text or just to check. It's hours.
Now it gives the
Statistics, yes, but it doesn't.
Each application, how much is spent.
Yeah, but we were hoping, we're trying to get someone to design it, but like how that you limit that it'll turn it off or give you points or encourage you, just like they used to do on the Bible apps or whatever. They encourage you when you turn off, or when you're not as active. And
Control my parents is very hard. I have two, one in high school, one in college. And Chris was up till 4 o'clock in the morning studying, and he had his phone on, and he has stuff on his phone. It's very hard to control.
it needs a lot of, because what happened is some of the they grew up with the technology from the beginning, whereas before, like if I think the younger age, now that we have a way to, or some type of plan from younger age, so the principles will be there. But it's a struggle. It's a struggle. And even in college, you're not going to be able to control. But at some point, what I want to give them is how to have that some tools that they will encourage each other, and how we have the atmosphere to say, yeah, this is good that you are struggling, because it's a daily struggle away from social media. Or they close their accounts sometimes in the Lent, where they turn off everything to encourage them. They said, okay, one of the youth was just talking before. They said, okay, yeah, he closes Facebook, and they're encouraging each other to do it. So that's the atmosphere, that how to foster it among it. It doesn't come, but they will be able to do it with each other better than from the parents or even from the servants. But how can I, like I said, how can I create that environment where it's popular and it's encouraged? And this is, it's not impossible. And I think they will like it, and they'll encourage each other, because now what's happening, that they're becoming more and more isolated from each other, and communication is more difficult. They don't know how to talk to each other or solve problems, and when they get in the workforce, any problem they don't know how to handle, because it's not a fix.
Yeah, it's study about this. They lose the capability of making the right decision, especially the one who started earlier in age, and
basic skills.
Yeah.
Basics. So it's yes.
The question came through the phone, but like the problem what we're having here at the church, like we're dealing with high school. It's kind of late already when they come to us. So the struggle is, like one of the servants just asked over the phone, like, how do you get them engaged when they are lost interest in the first place?
Yes. And I think so. I think for all of this lesson for the high school, it was one thing. What they're, most of them, not all of them, but many of them, lacking experience. The experience with God, deep personal experience. Yes. So if that's not there, I can, like, or I was, you could potentially, like, no Sundays, none, all of that, to focus on this. But once that's there, then of course I'm going to bring double the Sunday school, double all the activity, all the hymns. But what many times happens, we have all this content, and if that assumption of the relationship was not there, then I'm building on there's nothing, it's sand. So it's not our fault. But when I say how to assess this, and this is, so sometimes they used to take, okay, to the monastery, or sometimes it's very one-on-one. Sometimes it could be if I spend the whole year with one, and that's, I think we need some drastic work for that experience, because and sometimes it's in a crisis. So in high school they'll go through a crisis, and yeah, we'll spend a lot of time with them during that period, but focused on that relationship and teaching them how to pray, and that changes. So once that's there, like I say, don't have to worry, but the foundation is there, and you can build very easy. But sometimes what we sometimes mistake is that we are building, and that the basic principles were not there. Like, I remember when the atheism, there were a few years, it was just all about atheism. So we're building all the Sunday school and everything on advanced concepts, and the basic concept of faith, now they were challenged with, so we have to redo. It's not all wasted, but I mean, some of those things, I have to go back to square one. Okay, this is what this meant, this 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's the challenge. Yes, and how to be assured of that experience, because it's something that we can't compromise on that, but it's not, and it's a shocking, but for many of them it's not there. So what are we doing? Why would they? I say, well, they're coming to church. I say, yeah, but they don't understand like that what we assume is in front of us is not what's the.
I think it's mostly our fault. We're not engaging them from the start. We're not taking.
I think you're
creative in how to engage them from the start and capture their attention.
No, I think you're. I mean, like, I know there's a lot of good in the service. I don't want to make it all negative, but I know now, and I'm just from experience, that it's getting harder. But when you put a little effort, like, you'll reap a lot of fruit. It's just that it needs a little bit of a shift in perspective, because you probably have all of the contents. It's just like it's a tweaking. Like someone, they cooked very good meal. It's just need little spices. If you put just spices without it, it's not going to be no matter how good the spice, it's not going to work.
I think, Sayyidina, one of the reasons this discussion is happening is we have a class with very diversified, different type of people, and we're trying to have one message to fit them all. So if we make our message light, the person who really want to go deep, he get bored because he knows about this. If you go deep, the other person, he said, this is too deep for me, I'm disconnected. So I think the way we should handle this type of things is we need to create more one-to-one, like your Grace said, is we need to have this one-to-one relation to connect them directly with God. And without that, most of the time the lecture will not reach the people with different levels, because we cannot apply all those.
In the sermon, the same. Like, we have a simple message, but if you notice, like, even in the sermon, we have clear message. There's some things very basic, most of the people know. There's some things very, like, I have to add some things that hopefully nobody knows, but the main spiritual benefit, the change of life, it has to be there. So again, the percentages are going to differ, but if I'm conscious of it, so I'm going to say that. Like, I always try to have something new, but all of it can't be new, because there's some basic things they have to learn in this Sunday because it's related to next Sunday. And then, like I said, God will provide all of the. Yes.
Also, just say that for building the curriculum, the new curriculum is to start creating a library for the virtual aids and so that we need. So if I'm looking for this particular subject, then I go to one centralized place of devices where I can look to all the videos, the references related to these.
Yes. So
I don't want to rely on the servant, and not all of them have the capability to do the researches that we need for.
Yeah. So I forgot to mention. So now in the process, because it's very hard to do this type of curriculum, it's much harder, because we're spending a lot more energy on the scope and sequence. So you say, for example, by the time they finish Sunday school, what do I want? We want them to know what, to experience what, to whether it's all of the hymns, to know all in the Bible, to have a relationship with all the saints, to know the liturgy. And then we go backwards and say, okay, grade 1, this, grade, and then afterwards we have the topics, and then the topics is probably going to be more basic lesson, but with several aids, whether it's the homework, whether it's the videos, whether it's the songs related. So all of that's going to take some effort, and we're hoping if there are servants, we're not there yet, but we're trying to collect the servants that will help for that, and it will be interactive. So say, for example, a servant will have access to second grade for Kiach second Sunday, and then you have the lesson with a list of aids. If I have another PowerPoint or something for second grade, I will be able to upload.
I think also say that at the moment, every church has their own library and every servant has his own library. If you can create like a version which we can
Database.
start dumping those
Yes,
and
yes,
then be in a centralized place where we can share the exists and start filtering them.
Yeah.
Instead of starting from
Yeah, but right now we're just working on the structure because the scope and sequence is not ready yet. That's probably the hardest part. I hope it's going to. But so when we get to the end, it's easier. Just like I said, when you're planning, the hardest part is that first third or first half. Once I know what I need to do, let's say, go into the city that I will tell you, and you'll. So then I know what I'm going to do. I don't know exactly what's going to happen, and then God will provide the details. That's going to take most of the initial energy, the effort. Yes.
I feel like the ethos right now, just amongst the youth in general, is very nonchalant. There's no sense of urgency at all, and I feel like that's across the board, regardless of age. And I feel like us as servants have to take somewhat blame for it because
No, it's the generational problem.
But definitely, as servants, I'm in deadline. Because yeah.
I don't know. I know this. I know that they were saying that this coming generation is the hardest to convince to work, like as if they're going to be sitting and relaxed. How to convince them to stand up, it takes all of the energy. But they say once that they're motivated, once they're working, they're going to be the most effective than all of us because they have all the tools. They don't like to waste time, so they're very efficient in what they do, and they're very smart, but they're just. Again, the first part was it's like the paralyzed man. But he has once he gets up, he can do much better than we can do. And I think that's why they said all of our work is how to inspire and engage. Once they're engaged, it's almost that I just give some guidance. No, don't go here, don't go to do that. But that's why what we were doing, we're putting all the energy in the second stage, and that's what I was trying to. That's what we needed, just a little bit of shift. So how to tell them to get up, move, work.
It's tough, right? Because even in their schools now, you have school systems that are even eliminating homework, for example, and things like that. So they're not even told outside of the church to put in time and effort anymore. So when we come into Orthodoxy in particular, there is a huge emphasis on time and effort. And regardless of how you kind of shape it or send that message, at the end of the day, the message is the same. Where if you want to win your salvation, the key word is win. There's an investment of time and effort. And when those two words get put into you, this is something that I'm not going to deal with until I'm 45 or 50, and I have a feeling that I only have 10 more years to live, and I'll do what I have to do then. That's the sense, because to them, death is never knocking, because they don't understand that concept. And unfortunately, it takes a youth member to pass away in a car accident, God forbid, in order for them to all of a sudden say, hey, they stay close to home, I need to wake up. And then they'll wake up for a week, and they'll just go back to what they were doing before. So I feel like just overall, if their ethos is going to be very nonchalant, then our ethos has to be the other extreme to kind of wake them up. It can't just be that up. Like it's okay, it's okay, it's okay. We kind of have to push back a little bit and say, no, it's not okay that you don't want to pray today. It's not okay that you don't want to come to liturgy. It's not okay that you don't know what confession is. It's not okay that you can't define your salvation. Because you don't even know what you want to win anymore. You don't know what your goal is.
I think like I think what I hear, like it needs the inspiration, it needs the motivation, it needs the experience. Because any of those youth with the experience and with the motivation, like they're going to surprise us. Like many times I look to some of these, I said, I remember when they couldn't, like they didn't want to do any of that, and now they're bringing like many people. So how to assist or just how to be to provide to facilitate that work of God in their life, and that's many times all what we're like. It's the work of God. We're just helping or doing whatever we can to make the process go clarifying. So yes. I will. What you're saying, like the cognitive behavioral therapy, one of the youth, he went to AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, and he has addictive personality. And it's genetic, he discovered. But what he was saying, he said, how come you never spoke about any of these tools? Because there's a lot of effective tools that it changes life, to the point where he's addicted to doing the counseling for. And he told me he'll go every day. I told him, but you went, didn't you go yesterday? He said, yes, but there's this talk on this day, so I'm going to try and see if that one's... but he was saying, all of these tools, at least do one of them. He said, okay, I know you can't do a whole but there's a lot of tools here that could be implemented in the Sunday school or in sermons or what. And he showed me many Catholic priests, for example, that were giving sermons that help non-believers and Christians to grow in their life. And so it was eye-opening, because usually we put it like in a department here. So there's a lot of things, whether it's in therapy or in addiction or other, that can help us. And that's when we go, like say, when we are improving and expanding our knowledge in these, it's going to benefit, like your Sunday school time is not going to be the same as before. And that's the process where, yes, we are challenging ourselves, but also them every time. They don't know, as if they're coming in, they know they are going to benefit, they don't know how. And so that's what they're going to seek it. I don't want to take too much time. I don't know if Satan... Christos benoti Eboron tihrini moinan tikerin seminan tikerini canon of an anolje thok tetigom nemon mismon be mashani mean make us, O Lord, worthy to pray with all thanksgiving, our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Now may the love of God the Father, the grace of the only begotten Son, the Lord God and Savior Jesus Christ, the communion, the gift of the Holy Spirit be with you. Those who wish to go in peace. Peace of the Lord be with you.
Oh yeah.